You're listening to KHUH-LP, Seattle, 104.9 FM, broadcasting out of the Central District. This is Garrett Kelly. I'm here with
Curt Rowlett.
And tonight we're going to be talking about number stations and weird radio anomalies.
Oddities that you can hear on the airwaves.
And, what are we listening to right now? It's still going a little bit.
That's the exotic cipher track of the Conet Project 5 CD set. It's the much sought after, seldom heard Disc 5 that was issued in later years and a lot of people had trouble getting hold of. And so it's actually a real treat to be able to play this on the radio and talk about it. And it's one of those signals that's still a bit of a mystery. Nobody really knows exactly what it is. It's thought to be some sort of a digital signal, actually transmitting some information over the airwaves. The person behind the Conet project, Joaquin Fernandez, is the one who recorded it. And according to what I understand, he actually found this as an AM signal, and I may botch the information here, but I believe it was around 6,000 kilohertz in the AM band. And he said this signal was actually transmitting for several hours a day over a period of about 3 days, and he was able to make this recording. And he figures it's some sort of a frequency shift key or some sort of digital signal.
Awesome. It's one of my favorite. I love it. Just the musicality of it's really awesome. But yeah, it's cool.
It definitely has a Far Eastern flavor to it. So, it's which is the great thing about a lot of these signals. It's what really drew me in, especially as a kid, because I'd be dialing around on an old shortwave radio that my uncle gave me, and I would hear some weird signal. I had no idea what it was I was listening to. And so, later years, I actually hear about these things called number stations, and that really perked up my ears. I'm going, well, what the heck are these people talking about? I remember hearing weird things on the radio when I was a kid, and so when I heard about number stations, it immediately sucked me right in.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
So number station. There's this thing called number stations that people have been tuning in. Exactly how are people finding these things called number stations? What are they doing to find them?
Well, there's a whole group of hobbyists that have been around for years. They're just shortwave listeners. Some people have ham radio licenses, some don't, and anybody can buy a shortwave radio and tune around and listen onto the bands. And as long as there have been people using the radio, there have been spies sending out codes over the radio airwaves. And so a whole group of enthusiasts grew up over the years who were listening to all the commercial shortwave stations, but there was a subculture, if you would, of people who were listening to quote-unquote underground frequencies, and that was where people were finding things like these number stations. And essentially what a number station is exactly what it sounds like. It's a voice coming in over through the echo and the snap, crackle, and pop of the airwaves, repeating a long string of what sounds like meaningless numbers over and over again in a very strange and eerie voice. And people were recording these things. Well, first they were just hearing them and reporting them, going, what the heck are we listening to? And then a whole group of people started keeping logging the date and the time and the frequency they heard these things, and again, started to classify and categorize them, keeping logs from them. They gave them such interesting names as the Lincolnshire Poacher or the Buzzer, or in this example, what we were listening to, the exotic cipher. And I think, essentially when Joaquin Fernandez put the Conet project together, I think he was the one that, in my opinion anyway, is the person who kind of unleashed this onto the general listening public. It was something that was pretty much the realm of a very hardcore subculture of shortwave radio listeners. And Joaquin Fernandez, when he put this CD together and released it out, he gave the whole world the ability to hear the odd things that he had been recording in his small apartment in London for many, many years.
Why don't we listen to like a class? Well, there's the Englishman. That's like
exactly. Yeah, I should point out that the Englishman is one of the number stations that are presently still going. A lot of the ones that are on the Conet project are what we would, I guess you could refer to them as historical number stations because they're no longer broadcasting anymore. The Englishman is a good one because anybody that's got a shortwave radio or who can dial up a web SDR on their computer can still listen to this. So yeah, give it a spin. Let's hear it. I believe this particular signal, the Englishman, I think it's called a EO7 is the designator, is coming somewhere out of Russia. So the correction on that, this is actually not the EO7, it's the EO6 Englishman. Yeah, and essentially all of these number stations follow a format. For instance, you're hearing this guy calling out 361 over and over again, 361, 361. And at some point, the whole thing is going to shift and it's going to start. It'll give out another code after that. 361 is probably the agent number. There's some guy out in the field with a shortwave radio tuned into that frequency, and he's agent 361. And after the 361 is called, that alerts him to let him know 361, it's time to get your pencil and paper out because a message is going to follow here in a second. And then they'll give out some, if it follows a traditional format, they'll give out another code after the 361, something like either 145 or 261, which means something to the agent that he knows it's some sort of a different priority for the message. Another example of that is if the station calling 361 said 000, that would mean it was a null message. There was not going to be an actual message transmitted that day, and you'd hear 361 over and over again in 000, and after about 3 minutes the signal would just stop transmitting. But 361 and then a 3-number code like 257, and then immediately following that, you'd start hearing 5-number groups coming out. And the guy on the other end, he's been trained in the use of what's known as a one-time pad. He'll start writing down these 5 number groups, and once the transmission's over, he can take his secret key, his secret code key, and decipher the message he's just been sent from, let's just say it's Russia that's transmitting it, which this one is actually a Russian station, I believe, if I remember correctly. It's either Russia or Poland. And he will be thousands of miles away. He could be somewhere else in the Middle East somewhere receiving this message. And then once it's done, he'll take his code book that he used to decipher it, rip that page out and destroy it, and it will never be used again. It's known as a one-time pad, and it's thought to be unbreakable. So even in this day of the modern age of the internet, you can see the value of this. It's an unbreakable code. It's untraceable. Sure, they know that someone's transmitting. They're spies with a big transmitter in Moscow somewhere sending out spy messages, but it could be to anywhere in the world. Everybody that wants to can walk into a store, buy a shortwave radio, and tune into these stations. But there's only one guy, number 367 or 452, who's got that particular code book, and he's the only one that's going to get the message. And so that's who it's intended for. Untraceable. Nobody knows where he's at. Unless, like the landlady walks by his apartment and hears him in there listening to the radio and scribbling on a pad or something like that. But otherwise, he's never going to be caught. And that's the beauty of this. And even the best internet security still leaves traces of sorts. And that's the last thing spies want, is to get caught.
It's kind of changed now, so that I'm going to pull it up and we can hear some more.
Okay.
So we were just talking while we were listening to that, and you were saying that, so there's other theories about what these, and most people think this is spies communicating, but there are other
Correct, yeah. I've been listening to these for about 20 years now, and reading about them. There are quite a few groups that are out there that are followers. I want to say followers, that's probably the wrong word. There are groups that are dedicated towards listening to these stations, and like we mentioned before, to logging them and, taking down all the information they can find about them to try to spot any kind of patterns that they can. And when I first started listening to these, some of the talk out there was that, people were trying to identify exactly what these were because of naturally none of the government agencies of the world were coming clean about exactly what was going on. And so there were talk that these were possibly drug runners who were using the airwaves that were sending out coded messages about where drug supplies were being dropped, all kind of other criminal enterprises. I've even heard, people claim paranormal things for like UFOs and that sort of stuff. But actually, the truth of it is, it's almost obviously that it's got to be spies that are doing it. As a matter of fact, there were at least 2 cases that I've heard of where people were actually busted in espionage operations. I know there was one here in the United States out of Miami. There's a well-known Cuban number station that's broadcast out of Havana. There's one called the HM01, and there was another one, just a Spanish lady who would repeat numbers. And I know that there was a group busted out of Miami that they actually found their one-time pad and all that. So that was identified as definitely being a number station that was using the 5-number group format. There was another one in a European country where a person was arrested, and they also discovered that, yes, that's exactly what was going on. But, of course, because it's espionage, foreign government intelligence, and we are only on a need-to-know basis, it's not broadcast. But it's almost consensus opinion amongst the shortwave number station listeners around the world that we're talking about foreign governments and espionage.
And so this is all different governments are doing this.
Right.
This kind of stuff.
Even the United States did for a while. There was a station affectionately referred to as Cynthia, which, the letters CIA are found in that. It was broadcasting on an AM channel somewhere out of Florida. And there are examples and recorded samples of the Cynthia number station. It was a female voice, American accent, and it was definitely coming out of Florida. I read an article once about 2 gentlemen that got interested in the signal. This is probably sometime back in the late 70s, and they drove around Florida triangulating this signal as they got close to, I think it was actually the Miami airport. They said that the AM radio that they were using to triangulate, they tuned it to the frequency, and the radio almost jumped out of their hands because this number station came booming in. But I don't believe that the American government within the continental United States is broadcasting any number transmissions, but there are quite a few that come out of Europe. There are definitely, as Cuba, as we mentioned before, some coming out of Europe. There are some that are coming out of both North and South Korea. China has a couple of stations. I'm not sure that Japan does, but Japan has some oddity stations that we can talk about later. And there's a very interesting one that comes out of Egypt. It's, I believe, if my memory serves me, it's called the E25, the rebeat station that comes out of there, and it's a really odd signal. One of the things that's noteworthy about number stations these days is that almost all of them are using automated voice machines that are automatically programmed to read the numbers out. The Egyptian station, the E25 rebeat, is unusual in that it actually has a live female operator who's reading numbers out. So
we have that one queued up, so let's
sure. Let's listen to it. It's definitely worth listening to.
message 2002. One, zero, two, zero, 7, 1, 9, 0, 7, 2, 5, 4, 1, 9, 2, 9.
So you wanted to talk about what we're listening to here. Essentially, it's the same standard, if you will, number station format where she called out the agent number, the field agent number, and then she gave an identifier code telling the agent in the field what type of message to expect. And now she's giving out, in this instance, there are usually 5 number groups. Now she's giving out 4 number groups. And again, the agent, whether it's he or she, is sitting somewhere with a one-time pad, and they're going to decode this 4 number group into a plain text message of some sort or another. And the coolest thing about this particular station is it's thought to be done by a live person, because every now and then she will pronounce one of the numbers in a different fashion than if it was recorded. So, yeah.
Weren't you saying something about you could hear people coming in? Was that this one? Or
This station it's happened on before in other stations. For instance, this one you hear in that beeping sound that's going on, and I'm not exactly sure what that is. I believe it's something to do with the transmitter that they're using. But at other times when this station is scheduled to transmit, you'll actually hear the person come in, turn the transmitter on. You'll hear the Windows XP boot up sound, and let's say the guy's supposed to transmit at 1700 UTC, and he's there at 1645. Well, he's got to sit around and wait 15 minutes, and the lady's not shown up in the studio yet, so you can hear him actually sitting there playing Spider Solitaire on his computer. And people have recorded this. There are plenty of recordings of that out. It's just one of those little oddities that goes along with this.
0, 2, 1, 0, 2, 0, 7, 1, 9, 0, 7, 2, 5, 4, 1, 9, 2, 9, 2, 5, 9, 6, 1, 8, 9, 2, 1, 9, 6, 3, 0, 4, 2, 2, 6, 7, 2, 0, 8, 2, 8, 8, 8, 1, 2, 0. Two, 1, 9, 5, 2, 8, 8, 8, 8, 3, 8, 8, 8, 7, 0.
So do they always do this using voice, or are they other? I guess we heard the exotic cipher. Are there other methods of communicating?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all they do send some of these number stations out in digital form, and they also use Morse code. There's a pretty well-known Morse code station. One comes out of Cuba. I believe it's the M08. And there's one that comes out of Israel. It's sent by the Mossad, which is their secret service there, and it's called the 4XZ. And you can listen to it over shortwave, or you can listen to it using software-defined radio online. And if you've got a computer Morse code decoder there, you can fire that up, and it'll actually, once it starts to send out the actual Morse code message, you'll see it appear as 5 number groups as it's coming up.
Just so so everyone knows, Morse code is
it's the dots and dashes. You're hearing dot 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 dot
right.
That sort of thing. And if you're spoken word doing it, it's like D and da, D for the dots and da for the dashes. So yeah, it's just the old school Morse code. I know everyone's heard that before if they've ever watched an old war movie or something. So. And there's actually there's one really unusual station that I just learned about recently. I'm a contributor to a group called the Numbers and Oddities group. I occasionally will contribute things to their newsletter if I find an interesting signal. And I read on they put out a monthly newsletter called the Spooks Newsletter. And I recently found out on there that there was actually a Chinese station that does voice Morse code. And they're not sure exactly what this is about, but it's either related to the military or spies. But this guy is actually saying Morse code out loud. Yeah. We've got an example of that. I think if you want to play it later.
Yeah. Wow, that was a radio anomaly.
What was that?
It's just the feedback.
The operator error.
Yes. So I think I just wanted to take this back and talk about where these are transmitting exactly. So my understanding is, when we're broadcasting right now on 104.9 here in the Central District, and when you're in your car, you're listening between, was it 88 point something to
88.1 going forward, yeah.
Yeah, to 107 or something.
Right.
And then when you're on a walkie-talkie, you're talking on a certain frequency. I don't
Right.
know the range there, but
2 meters starts at 144?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, 144 megahertz.
But there's lots more that you can.
Exactly, and I think I know where you're going with this. It's most of the number stations, because spies in one country are trying to reach people in far-flung parts of the globe, they're using high-frequency radio, which means that there are, transmitting mostly on sections of the band that are not normally used by commercial radio or used by people who have amateur radio licenses.
So you're not going to hear this in your car.
You're not going to hear it in your car, but if you get a shortwave radio and you're tuning around in some of the areas that are not, usually you're not expecting to find something there, and you're patient enough and you have an idea of about when one of these signals is scheduled to broadcast, you might get lucky and hear it, but it's not something that your normal average radio listener is going to be able to just stumble across. You have to use it's a little bit like fishing,
But what I've recently learned, and it sounds like you do this a lot, there are other ways that you can get a shortwave radio, but there are other ways that you can do for free or very
Absolutely.
cheap.
It's one of the best things about this, what I refer to as my hobby, because even though I'm a licensed radio amateur, I consider this a sub part of my hobby. And the cool thing about it is you can go on the internet, and all you have to do is, if you pull up Google or your favorite search engine, type in Web SDR, that's SDR, which stands for Software Defined Radio, and it'll pop up. It'll give you a list that you can click on, and you'll probably find links to, I'm going to guess right off the bat, 20 to 30 different web software-defined radios located in parts of the world, all around the world. For instance, you'll find a software-defined radio that's transmitting out, it's receiving out of Moscow. And you're trying to find a signal that's coming out of Moscow. So you would want to choose a software-defined radio that's located closest to the signal that you're interested in. Or you might just be tuning in to try to discover whatever it is you can hear. In that case, you can go to something like, there's one out of the Netherlands called the University of Twente. And if you put in UTWENTE into the browser, that one will pop up. And so you're just basically using it to scan the airwaves, to listen to high-frequency signals that might be thousands of miles away from your home, but through the magic of the Internet, you can listen to it right there on your computer, and you can see it, because software-defined radio, if you're not familiar with this, if people are listening and aren't familiar, it's like looking at a radio dial that has the numbers and the graduations, like you're dialing between, kilohertz and megahertz, and you've got the little hash marks on it. You can actually see a signal that's being transmitted on one frequency. You might be tuned in, let's say you're tuned in to 4625, or way over on 4629, there's a signal that you can see, but you can't hear because you're not dialed into it. You just take your mouse, point on that signal, and click on it, and you can hear whatever's being transmitted. It's really cool.
Yeah,
and it's free.
Yeah, it's free, and I think that's one of the. It's really cool to visually see. It's like they call it a waterfall, so it's moving past you.
Yep.
It's scrolling up,
yep.
And you can just see everything in front of you, and you can kind of move around and just like, what is that? Something's going on over there, and you can kind of tune.
It actually makes it easier than just using a standard shortwave radio, because that you're constantly spinning the dial. This one, you can be sitting on one frequency, and suddenly, in watching the radio while you're listening and you're watching the waterfall. Sudden, a signal will appear over there, and you can go over and check it out, because otherwise you wouldn't have known whether to go left or right on your radio dial. So that's the cool thing about software-defined radio. I use it, I run a YouTube channel where I record these signals. I'm always hunting for either number stations that I know are going to pop up, because some of them have a well-known schedule, and I'm also looking for all kinds of other oddities that you can find out. There are digital signals that I'm able to recognize now what the signal is, because I've seen them on the waterfall. I know what the pattern looks like, and I know what it sounds like to my ear. Every now and then I'll see a signal pop up, and I'll go, what the heck is that? And I'll go jump onto it. It's something I've never heard before. And that's part of the beauty of this, because not only is it about number stations, but it's about oddities that are out there too. Just like the guy yelling out Morse code.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. You should talk about how you got into this, and what your website and about.
Yeah, sure. This won't benefit the listeners, but I'm holding in my hand a copy of a book that got me interested in this. It's called The Underground Frequency Guide by a guy named Don Schimmel. And this was put out sometime in the early 90s, and I have always been interested in radio. I'm old enough now that radio for me growing up was the internet of its time. It was the only way that you could get information from all over the world. And my uncle at one point gave me an old cheap shortwave, and I can remember lying in bed at night when I was supposed to be asleep, tuning across the dials, and every now and then I would find a signal that I couldn't understand what it was. I remember this one in particular. It sounded just like an airplane in flight, and every time I tuned to that particular frequency, I would hear this thing, and I had no idea what it was. And in my mind of a 10-year-old, it was a plane flying overhead and with bombs going somewhere. Now, of course, I could probably, if I heard the same signal and I saw it on a software-defined radio, I'd go, oh, that's just a carrier signal coming out of somewhere. But, it planted that seed in my mind. And so years later, in the early 90s, I found this book I was just talking about, Don Schimmel's Underground Frequency Guide, and in there, it was the first mention I ever heard of clandestine stations like number stations and the oddities and all that. And so that really piqued my interest. Bought another shortwave radio. Moved to Seattle in 1998, and at some point after I got here, I went into a local record store. I believe it was over in Lower Queen Anne somewhere. And the clerk inside there, I was browsing records, and I remember records, LPs, vinyl. I was browsing in there, and they were actually playing the Conet Project CD set over the store sound system. And I'm in there browsing for records, and I'm hearing these numbers being, 5, 7, 8, 6, and I'm browsing, and I'm going, what in the heck is this? And so found the record I was looking for, and I walked up and I was checking out, and I talked to the clerk. I said, what is this that's playing? Oh, that's the Conet Project CD. I'm going, really? And so I'm very intrigued about that. And so I found out, however, I went on about my business, and I was going, well, this is really interesting. Got on the internet and typed in the Conet Project, and I found out there was a guy called Akin Fernandez who had actually, he was the same thing. He was a shortwave radio listener working out of his apartment in London with a little cheap shortwave radio, and he was picking up all these really weird signals coming out all over Europe up late at night, and he was actually recording them. And so he saved all of these recordings of all of some of the odd stuff, including like the exotic cipher that we heard earlier and a lot of other historically named number station signals, and he put them all onto this CD set, and it became quite a phenomenon. A lot of people who first heard about number stations have the Conet Project to think about that, and myself included. It's really what pulled me in. And so once I actually heard about that, then I had to get a copy of this. And so, the strange thing is, I really got interested in, started listening, and at the time there wasn't such a thing as software-defined radio, so I was using shortwave to try to catch them. I think the first one I ever caught was the Cuban number station coming out of Havana, and I caught it in my apartment I was living in over in Magnolia, and I was everything but jumping up and down. I got this thing, it's snap, crackle, pop. I can barely hear it, but it's definitely a Spanish numbers lady repeating numbers, cuatro, cinco, through the airwaves. And so I was hooked immediately after that.
Wow.
Got pulled a little farther in.
So let's talk. This is not all about numbers. The number stations is there's also kinds of other things that you could.
Right, exactly. There's a big group that monitors these number stations, and they report on them. We all share, new stuff that we've heard, old stuff that we know about that's been around for a while. And they also report on oddities that are heard over the airwaves. Those are typically signals that people have heard once, maybe 2 or 3 times, and they appear and are never heard again, and nobody can figure out exactly what it was that they were listening to. And so those kind of things intrigue me as well. I mean, besides radio interests me, and so does any other kind of strange recording. I'm a found sound type of person, strange telephone calls, weird things that have been recorded in the ocean. I mean, people have made really strange underwater recordings using I forget what it's called, but it's the hydrophone listening array they put together to listen to the Soviet subs and all that, and they've actually recorded some pretty odd things. I think NOAA made some really strange recordings. The bloop is one of them. So it's things like that. Any kind of odd found sound that pulls me in. Radio's the easiest thing to to actively be able to hear this. I mean, anybody that's listening to this broadcast right now, they can go out as soon as this is over, fire up the web SDR, and do a little bit of research on the internet, and you'll find plenty of websites that'll direct you to the correct frequencies and the time to be able to dial these strange stations up for yourself. If I can give my website out, you can go and listen to a lot of them I recorded. My website is Labyrinth13. I'll spell that. It's LABYRINTH13.com. So labyrinth13.com. If you go on there, I've got links at the top of the page to my YouTube channel. That's where I keep all of my radio recordings and telephone recordings and odd things that I found related to sound. And there's also a link to my Twitter feed for Strange Beacons. And I've also got a SoundCloud account. So all 3 of those things have different things that I've recorded. They're not all in one place, so if you take a walk through all those accounts, you'll hear things that not only I've recorded myself, but that other people have and that I've shared on my website. So yeah, there's a lot of things besides number station. There's some really strange oddities in sound to be found out there, bouncing around.
Is there one here that we might We have the lost shoe, but I don't, what else do we have here?
You're talking about an emergency action message.
Yeah. Should we do that one?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to explain what that is before?
It's the United States Air Force and other military organizations use something called the high frequency. It's the HFGCS network. I can't remember exactly what that acronym stands for, but they send out something called an emergency action message. Anyone that's ever seen some of these submarine movies out there, Crimson Tide, I think, was one, and a couple of other ones. The Crimson Tide, if I'm recalling correctly, was the one that made exclusive use of emergency action messages. And what it is, it's actually a radio operator that's sending out a nuclear code that is copied by a submarine that's underwater somewhere, and it could be everything from, hey, we've got the shipment of potatoes that you ordered and you'll be picking it up in the next port, to go ahead and arm the nuclear warheads, we're going to be firing them off pretty soon at Moscow. So that's an emergency action message, gets repeated, and they usually, you'll hear anything from a voice using a call sign, like Rainbow Unicorn is one that I heard recently. Lost Shoe is another one. And they'll usually repeat out a phonetic message, using the standard NATO phonetic alphabet, like Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, that sort of thing, and then numbers mixed in with it. And then there's another one that's called Sky King, and the Sky King messages are thought to be the actual nuclear codes. And Sky King is, of course, from what I understand, I may not have this completely correct, Sky King is supposed to be one of the big, like, nuclear control airplanes that's constantly flying up in the sky, and it's ready to jump right into a nuclear war at any moment that we need to. And the Sky King is the one that's going to be directing all of that wonderfulness too. So,
well, now I'm a little nervous about playing this one on there. What happened with Hawaii lately? I'm like, maybe we shouldn't play this one.
Well, we're letting everybody. This is like War of the Worlds. We're letting everybody know, hey, this is a pre-recorded message. It's not meant to be actually. We're not sending it out to a nuclear sub anywhere. Okay, so you guys just take it easy. Listen to whatever you're going to listen to there.
Okay, we'll just play a snippet of this one.
If it's not the whole message, then they can write it down and they don't have it. They can't authenticate, So.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah, there's a whole group of listeners that may not care one whit about number stations or anything like that, but they actively monitor the emergency action messages. So.
This is Lost Shoe, break. Foxtrot. 4, Echo, India, Romeo, Foxtrot, standby, Foxtrot, 4, Echo, India, Romeo, Foxtrot, standby, Foxtrot, 4, Echo, India, Romeo, Foxtrot, standby, message follows. Foxtrot, 4, Echo, India, Romeo, Foxtrot, 5, Foxtrot, Zulu, 7, Whiskey, Papa, Oscar, Tango, 7, India, 4, India, Papa, uniform, X-ray, 6, Quebec, 6, uniform, Echo, India, Whiskey, November.
I am Jimmy Kimmel.
Hotel.
Don't miss the Oscars.
Again. Foxtrot, 4, Echo, India, Romeo, Foxtrot, 5, Foxtrot, Zulu, 7, Whiskey, Papa, Oscar, Tango, 7, India, 4.
So anyway, you cut that off before the whole code got out. So if you heard that, this is just a drill. Yeah, call the plane back. Stand down.
So the next one we're going to play is this Japanese, you said slot machine, as in quotes, but...
The Japanese slot machine, and there's one called the Chinese robot as well. The Japanese slot machine that would be a good one for people who are just wanting to get into this to go and find. It transmits 24/7 on... I think there's anywhere from 1 to 4 frequencies that this is transmitting on, and it's thought to be some sort of radio modem that's continuously running somewhere for the Japanese Navy. It's probably being broadcast. Some coastal city in Japan is sending this out, and occasionally you'll hear it. The recording that I've got for it that we're going to play is you're going to hear it in what's called idling mode. In other words, it's like a carrier signal, and then every now and then they'll throw some information on it that'll probably go out to a Japanese warship somewhere to be decoded on their end of things. But it's got a very unusual signal. Before anybody identified what it was, people would tune into this and go, that sounds like some crazy slot machine running. So that's hence, where a lot of these things get their names like that. They get nicknamed first before anybody identifies what they are. So it became the Japanese slot machine.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's hear the Japanese slot machine.
Okay, so now you know what the Japanese slot machine modem sounds like. You've got a nice earful of that. And one thing I want to point out is if you do go, whenever that was a particular signal that I recorded. Every time I upload these things, if you're deciding to get into this, you find yourself a good web SDR, I always put down the frequency that I recorded it at in the description of the video, so you won't have to go search too far to know what frequencies to go find these on. So,
yeah, it looks like it was 6250 kilohertz.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And I think there's, like I said, anywhere from 1 to 4 known frequencies that you can keep dialing around. It's best to go. There's a web SDR that's located right in Japan. It's one of the few that are actually in Japan, and if you pull that one up, you can easily find that signal on there. Not that you may not want to after listening to it earlier. So,
We're gonna play this other. Looks like I went to the next video. The Chinese robot one.
Yeah, exactly. This one is one that I don't know much about, but I discovered this one by another YouTuber that I follow. His account. He's a guy called First Token, and he's on YouTube. Another big radio listener. He actually really motivated me to go find a lot of these signals, and he's got some really odd stuff on his channel. I've got it. He's linked as one of the preferred channels off of my own YouTube channel, and the Chinese robot was one of them. He was actually not using a web SDR. He was using his own software-defined radio on his computer and an antenna outside of his house to pull this signal in. The Chinese robot is odd because it's yelling. It's a machine that's constantly repeating numbers in Chinese over and over again, but it says it so fast you can't imagine how somebody could decipher this with the human ear over any length of time. I mean, you couldn't really, even if you understood Chinese numbers, you could, you understood the language. I can't imagine someone sitting there jotting this down. And so not a whole lot is known about this particular station, exactly what it is, but it does appear to be some sort of a number station. It's very odd. Very, very odd to listen to.
Okay, well, let's...
And for obvious reasons, it's called the Chinese robot. You'll hear it. It's very, very mechanized.
Let's hear a little bit of that.
Sure.
Oh. I'm going to unmute it. There we go.
We're pushing buttons here and drinking caffeine. So how was that one on your ears?
I love that. Like I said, that sounds like just some of the music we play on the station here. Actually, this is a good time to do a little station ID. You're listening to KHUH LP 104.9 FM, Seattle. We're broadcasting out of the Central District in Seattle. Also, you can tune in online, hollowearthradio.org. We're all volunteer radio station here in Seattle, and if you want to become a member, you could also click on the donate on our website, and you can get a T-shirt as a nice member perk. It went to something. I don't know what's going on now. There we go. Turn that off. But here with Curt, we're talking about number stations, radio anomalies.
Weird sounds.
Yeah.
From all sorts of communication devices.
Right. And so, maybe we'll segue into, you've also done some stuff with just telephone.
I personally haven't done much with telephone, but I'm interested in all kinds of recordings that other people have done from odd things that have been recorded through the telephone system. I think there's one we've got queued up here. It's an actual recording that came over the telephone of an elderly lady who lived in Greeley, Colorado. And I can't remember the time frame for this, what the year was. I'm going to take a guess that it was sometime in the mid-90s, maybe. That might sound right. I think this one is loaded up on my YouTube channel, and I've got the actual date and time down there. So if you really need to know that, you can go find it out. But the backstory on this was pretty simple. This elderly lady, at every afternoon or evening, whenever she picked her telephone up at home, she would suddenly hear this really strange message being broadcast over her telephone. She could not use her telephone, and this really strange recording was coming over it. And I think it freaked her out so much that she called her son, who came driving over to the house, and he happened to bring along his recorder, and he, for all posterity, recorded this really creepy sounding phone message that I think would freak about just to anyone out that heard it coming over their telephone.
Here, let's play a little bit of that.
Okay. And there's some really odd stuff that's been recorded on the telephone. This is among them.
NORAD, EWS, Station Zulu Foxtrot 77, Zulu Foxtrot 77. Status alert Con 4. Status alert Con 4. Security tracing in progress. Attention. 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 Whiskey 09. Ready. November Papa 4. Danger. Hotel Papa 8. 7. Ready. Hotel, Quebec, 3, 9. Ready. Papa, Kilo, 5, 8. Ready. Foxtrot, Charlie, 2, 3. Ready. November, 1, 8. Trigger. Victor, Yankee, 9, 2. Ready. Lima, Charlie, 5, 6. Secure. Attention. Attention. Attention.
So you get a call from your mom, your elderly mom, who tells you, son, you got to get over here. Whenever I pick up the telephone, I mean, this is what you're hearing.
Right. That was amazing.
Yeah. So it actually, I think there was a Reddit thread about this. I first got alerted to this, and I found out that a guy had uploaded, the actual guy who recorded this uploaded this to Vimeo. That's, one of the file sharing video sites. And I borrowed it off of there and put it on my channel. And the backstory on this was, I think she lived close enough to one of the Air Force bases that are located there in Colorado, and this was some sort of NORAD telephone system that went out over the old school analog telephone system to control something somewhere, and it just inadvertently got spiked over into her phone and just scared the heck out of her, so.
Are there any other telephone anomalies that I'm not sure?
Yeah, I've got a few more on my channel. I've actually got a separate playlist for all the telephone stuff that I've done on there, and a couple of them, not really convinced that they're anything more than just strange pranks that are being played on people. Mm-hmm. There was another interesting one that a guy who turned out to be some sort of paranormal researcher. He got this really unusual telephone call that came to his house, and it was a really creepy, almost Darth Vader sounding mechanized voice that kept repeating nonsensical stories to him, phrases to him over and over again, kind of like the Harvard sentences that you and I were discussing earlier before we got on the air. And that was one of them. But I wasn't convinced that was kind of one of those iffy things, This doesn't appear to have much clandestine espionage, secret military stuff or anything like that behind it. So, and there's a couple other ones that I've got there, but it might be more interesting for people to go and just pull it up and have a look at it for themselves.
Right. I remember I saw on your site the Beacon of Hate too. Or something.
Yeah, that's a Morse code station. That was actually a pretty interesting one. This guy, I can't remember his call sign. He's a fellow located somewhere in Texas. And naturally, I'm always out on the internet scouring for found sound, interesting things, creepy, weird signals that people might find. And I found this guy's webpage that he had a bunch of interesting recordings that he had made over the years. And one of them was a 10-meter band Morse code signal that he heard transmitting, and the thing that caught his ear about it was that it was sending out really super odd messages, and the station never identified itself. So right off the bat, it's against the FCC rules because you got a person transmitting over the amateur radio band, and they're not identifying themselves. So that's automatically illegal. And the nature of the message was so strange, and the fact that this guy chose such an obscure method, Morse code, that very few people can actually have the wherewithal to decode by ear, and not many people are sitting there with a Morse code decoder. And he was sending out a very bizarre message, and it had something to do with camels and pornography, and that the United States was some sort of weird godless entity that was trying to control people through the use of camels. I mean, you have to read this and hear it just to believe it. It's really an eyebrow raiser, but it would pop up and transmit for maybe 3 or 4 days straight, and then it would go silent, and then maybe 3 to 4 weeks, maybe a month later, it would pop up and start transmitting for another 3 days. And so because it was so strange, and it was ranting against all these things to do with, again, like porn and anti-government rant, that he had labeled it the Beacon of Hate. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Which is because it sounds like a Morse code beacon. A lot of people listening may not understand that Morse code is used as a beacon that will send the same message over and over again, so people can tune in and tune their antennas, and they'll know that something's located in a certain position, and they know how to, tune their radios and tune their antennas to get the great frequency conditions for operating on that particular band. So. Yeah, it was acting like a beacon, but it was sending out very non-beacon-like messages. So,
right.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and I think I found that on your website, which you want to give that again. And
labyrinth13.com.
And you can actually, there's a little video about that.
Yeah, if you Google strange beacons, yeah, that's the name of the website. It should pop right up in Google.
Let's see. Is there anything else in here that we...
What else we got over here?
There is this whale. The whale.
The 52 hertz whale.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not my recording, because I obviously don't have the proper equipment to record whale sounds from my house. This one, I forget who actually made this recording, and I don't know much about the backstory on this, but apparently whales. When whales are singing their whale song, they are singing at so many hertz. I think I'm going to get this right. Anywhere between 30 and 40 hertz is your typical whale frequency, and it will travel long distances underwater to tell other whales, going, "Hey, there's an eligible bachelor over here swimming your way up from the Gulf of Mexico or wherever they're at, the Sea of Cortez," and they are all tuned in and listening for a particular frequency that lets them know, hey, that's a blue whale. Hey, that's my gray whale friend. The 52 hertz whale is it's almost like he was born. They believe it's the only whale song they've ever heard at 52 hertz. And obviously, if you're singing a song at 52 hertz and all the other whale brethren are listening for it between 30 and 40, guess what? They're never going to hear you. And as a result, here's this whale singing out for other whales, who are never going to hear him. So they've labeled him the loneliest whale on the planet because they figured that he's never going to be heard. He's been recorded multiple times, assuming that it is a he. He's been recorded multiple times, and there's actually, I think, a project got launched. Someone was putting together some sort of a documentary about this. We're actually going to go out and search and see if they could locate this whale, because no one's sure exactly what's going on behind this, but it's one of those underwater oddity sounds.
It's interesting because it's like the beacon of hate almost. Like they're like broadcasting.
This is the beacon of love,
right? Yeah, they're both right. Yeah, right. But like the audience is very small. It's just these people who.
Yeah, exactly. Well, how many geeks are there listening to hydrophones underwater?
Right. Yes. So let's play. You know, that might not be what this is, but we'll play this anyways. Let's see.
Yeah. What are you queuing up?
This says XM whale backwards music station.
Oh, this isn't
different.
actually to do with actual whales. This is it's called the backwards music station or XM whales because some people think it actually sounded a little bit like a whale song, but we're talking about an actual radio transmitted sound here, a frequency sound.
So we'll play this, and I'll find the 52 hertz whale, and we'll play that one too.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Well, meanwhile, we'll listen to this backward. What did you say? The XM?
It's XM whales or the backwards music station. It'll be obvious why when you hear it.
Okay. All right. Do you mind explaining a little bit about what we're hearing here in this recording?
I will try to, but no one really knows definitively exactly what the XM Wales backwards music station signal is. But the theory that's been thrown about, one of the other groups that monitors number stations and oddities on the airwaves is a group called Priom. That's PRIYOM.org. And I listened to a podcast that they did about this particular signal, and the consensus amongst them and a lot of other people who listen to these signals is that the XM Wales station is actually some sort of continuously playing voice scrambling system that's used on high-frequency radio. In other words, if they're going to be transmitting in voice, it'll actually scramble their voice as it's coming over the airwaves, so you don't know what they're saying, and whatever language they're speaking is getting scrambled. And unless someone puts some information, they key up a mic and send a voice-modulated signal over that frequency, what you hear is a voice scrambler in idling mode, and it sounds like a whale singing or music being played backwards when actual modulated signal gets put over it. It's actually pretty strange, but no one's exactly sure what that is, but that seems to be the consensus opinion. But it's a really odd signal, and you don't find it. It's a kind of a rare thing to be able to capture and record because it pops up in random places on the high frequency bands.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the 52 hertz whale, the beacon of love.
From simulated whales to actual whale.
Right.
Yeah.
There we go. Let's see.
The beacon of love.
There we go. That was the whale there.
Yeah, that was the 52 hertz whale, and I think if I recall correctly, it's sped up like 20 times. So otherwise, it would be drawn out in a very long signal that wouldn't be super audible for any human ear. So, yeah. Oh. But poor lonely whale, he's unfortunately been probably genetically born with a falsetto that nobody else can understand. So, a natural falsetto, wow. It's yeah.
We mentioned the Harvard sentences earlier, and I have that recording, so maybe we could play a little bit of that.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
But one thing, so we were talking about the SDRs, and there's all kinds of things you can, if you look up SDR online, you can find all these web SDRs, and it's also possible to buy. I bought a $20 little software-defined radio
dongle,
USB
dongle,
yes. Yeah. And it's USB, and you just plug it in your computer, and it has a little antenna with it, yep. And you can become one of those little receiving stations
exactly
with your computer, and there's free software to just what you are capturing around you, what signals are going on,
right.
And you can see the same waterfall. And I've been having a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, the dongles are great. I think they were originally used for in European countries. They would plug them in to catch local television stations over your computer, and then people found out that they could also be used for the UHF, VHF bands. And you can also plug in something called a ham-it-up converter, which will allow you to hit a switch, and you can tune in high frequency using the same free software. I think I paid $20 for mine.
Yeah.
Altogether, maybe $30 for my whole little radio rig, and so that's another way, cheap way to get into radio.
Yeah, I have a lot of fun. I'm going to play one that Harvard sentences. So when I was just going around, I was in Port Townsend, and I And then I came across this at like 450 megahertz or something. I'm like, and I heard this recording. I have that, and I was like, what is this? This shouldn't. What am I hearing? So, but you says the Harvard sentences. You want to explain what that is, maybe before?
Yeah.
What you know of it?
From what I understand, the Harvard sentences are literally a group of Harvard scholars got together, and this is used for people who are in the radio and communications industry who are talking to large groups of people. Apparently, from what I understand, the Harvard sentences are put together in such a way that if you speak these well and you can articulate and not stumble over the Harvard sentences, then it will train your voice to be very well enunciated when you are communicating over the airwaves. And so from what I understand, what you probably recorded, and this is what I've read on the internet, the greatest bastion of truth that it ever was, that there are actually groups of military radio operators who will get on certain frequencies and they will sit there and transmit Harvard sentences over and over again. And for somebody who doesn't know what they are, you think you've stumbled onto the lunatic asylum of radio shows that you're listening to.
Yeah,
so,
I thought there's some code here. What is going on? So
exactly. Yeah, John has a long mustache.
Right.
The fish is red.
Right. So we'll play a little bit of this. It's not the best recording, but you can hear a little bit of
The
that.
chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall.
Here are the Harvard sentences.
As recorded by Garrett.
Every word and phrase he speaks is true. He put his last cartridge into the gun and fired. They took their kids from the public school. Drive the screw straight into the wood. Keep the hatch tight and the watch constant. Sever the twine with a quick snip of the knife. Paper will dry out when wet. Slide the catch back and open the desk. Help the weak to preserve their strength. A sullen smile gets few friends. A pencil with black lead writes best. Coax a young calf to drink from a bucket. Schools for ladies teach charm and grace. The lamp shone with a steady green flame. They took the axe and the saw to the forest. The ancient coin was quite dull and worn. The shaky barn fell with a loud crash. Jazz and swing fans like fast music. Rake the rubbish up and then rake the rubbish up.
So that was some Harvard sentences that I recorded with a little SDR, $20. You plug it in your computer.
And you reckon that's probably coming? I think I heard that the Navy somewhere over near Whidbey is probably transmitting those, especially if you record it on FM simplex, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
so.
at the time, I was just starting, I was just pushing buttons and seeing what.
Oh, that's the best way, man. That's yeah.
But it's really fun. Really fun. There's actually one other little recording I was going to play. It's real short. This was just it sounded like bus drivers talking, doing bus traffic about picking up, maybe school bus drivers or something. And this is another thing I recorded on the SDR, and I was like, oh, cool, the bus drivers, maybe there'll be some drama or something. So I just recorded and I left. I came back, I was listening back, and when I was listening back afterwards, the very end of this...
Got a real surprise.
There's a little surprise, and I was like... And the funny thing, you don't hear anything after this, but no one responds to this little surprise. It's as if no one heard it. So here we go. Well, this is
by all means.
Some bus drivers.
Route 6 to base. Virginia, do you hear me? Copy fine, 6. Base Route 6 is trying to reach you. Do you copy?
Yeah, so
okay, that was creepy.
I hear you. I don't know. I literally jumped out of my chair like, what was that? I mean, maybe it was one of the bus drivers being funny or something.
Right.
But it really it's strange that no one responds or like, oh, come on, or there's just no response to that, and it creeped me out. I was like, what is that?
That almost has. If you ever listened to the electronic voice phenomena, the EVP,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
it almost has that ghost sound to it. You know?
Or like, could it be someone who's like listening to and then transmitting back? And
You remember which frequency you recorded
I have
that
it.
on?
I do have it in.
Because I was curious as to whether or not it was in the amateur bands or it might be on a commercial, it could be tow truck drivers or any sort of like commercial vehicles that are operating,
It looks like 151 megahertz.
I think that's outside of the 2-meter amateur band, isn't it? So, yeah. So somebody if they either had a right to be on there and they were just messing around with their friends, or someone's got an illegal transmitter and they're jumping on and doing naughty things on the radio. So
let's actually talk about amateur radio and what that is. And I know you also go by W9 Spy,
right? W9SPY,
and I'm actually Whiskey India 5 Hotel Echo Romeo.
Awesome.
WI5 HER Wisher.
Yeah.
So we actually both have ham radio licenses. They're an amateur license, but maybe you actually teach people how to become an amateur radio licensee. So you want to explain what that is for people?
Yeah, sure. I work with a great group of guys here in Seattle. Daniel Stevens, whose call sign is completely fallen out of my head right now, and also a group of 4 other guys. They have been doing this for years now, and I went to one of their classes, and they got me licensed, and I ended up enjoying the hobby so much that I decided I wanted to give a little something back, and so they allowed me to come up here and started volunteering with them, and now I think I've been with them almost a year now, and they've actually felt confident enough to let me get up and talk to some people about what to expect of what's coming on their exam. We hold classes that are usually 16 hours of classroom time. We split that up over 2 Saturdays. So what that means is someone will come into whatever hall we've got for the day, come in the morning and sit there for 8 hours of voice instruction, and we also use visual aids through a PowerPoint slide, that sort of thing. And we go section through section of the actual question and answers that will appear on the FCC exam. And because the Freedom of Information Act allows us to know what the questions and the answer pool is, we can sit there and tell you what each question that might possibly come up on the exam and tell you the exact answer and go over it with you and explain to you why you should answer it that way, so you'll have a better idea of when you sit down to take the random pool of questions, 35 questions, you'll have a lot better chance to be able to pass the exam than you would studying on your own. So it's great fun. I mean, we have graduated a whole bunch of brand new technicians.
I graduated through this class too.
We both did. We're both veterans of the same class, and so that's just me trying to give a little something back. And
so when you become a ham radio operator, you are allowed to broadcast on some frequencies that are given to. That's
correct, and it depends on the level of license that you get. Most of the classes that we teach are technician, which is the entry level for amateur radio. And technicians are allowed, we as radio amateurs are only given certain sections of the various amateur bands that are out there. We've got, a little small piece of it because, there's billions and billions of radio frequencies. And they designate certain bands to be the amateur bands. And in between those, you'll find your military and your emergency services, first responders, and commercial radio. And it keeps amateurs from interfering with those stations, which would be a catastrophe if you were walking all over an imported fire station call or something like that. So you learn where you can transmit, and technicians have a part of the band, and the next license is general. They get a little bit more privileges. I think, if I last recall, it was around 80% of the band. Then you have your amateur extra. So there's three levels. There's technician, general, amateur extra. Amateur extras get the entire spectrum of the band. And so it's essentially, I tell people, anybody can listen to shortwave. They can listen to VHF, UHF. You take the FCC license in order to get the right to push the talk button and being able to talk, so that you're passing the exam. It gives you the right to talk to people instead of just listening.
And you can talk really, especially if you have these higher privileges, you can talk very far away. And,
yeah, you can. Even with a technician license, you get a very small section of the high frequency band. But the great thing about all of the modern innovations that we have now, people have taken the best of the internet and computers. They've linked it in with ham radio. You can now most UHF, VHF radios that you buy these days, you can actually pick it up, hook into a repeater. They've got a DTMF tone button just like you have on your telephone. You can punch in a certain code, and it'll connect you to a repeater that it's linked to, say, in Australia. And you can use what normally would be simplex radio, 12 to 15 miles
Like
away in your area, like a walkie-talkie. You can connect it to a repeater, which is connected to the internet, which connects you to Australia. And you could be talking to somebody in Australia using a handheld radio. So you get a lot of privileges as a technician. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I really recommend. It's really fun to walk around with this walkie-talkie with a huge antenna around town and be listening to people.
You let people see you do it.
Oh yeah. I like to brag about this. I have this giant.
What's that on your hip there?
Yeah, right. Yes, it's pretty fun, and I got rid of my cell phone a year and a half ago, and I'm just on just the ham radio. I'm trying to get my wife to that.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's just fun to. It's a free way to hear all these sounds and communicate, and
absolutely.
I think it's really fun. It brought me into this SDR world and finding all these weird number stations and things. And there's a lot of things out there that are involved and entangled with the hobby. I think there are all kinds of different things you can be involved in. And there's a lot of, even like emergency preparedness. There's that kind of.
You got it. Yeah. Now, high percentage of the students that come into the class are there for emergency preparedness too.
Because and the main reason is because when there is some kind of earthquake,
tsunami, earthquake, especially in this area of the world, earthquakes.
There's a lot of the other ways that you would communicate or maybe not be functioning, but this is something that's a little bit better.
We tell people when the cell phone, when this has been proven, and any emergency that takes place, like a hurricane in some parts of the country, like for instance in Florida, the cell phone system got overwhelmed down there because so many people were jumping on their telephones at the same time that actually overwhelmed the system. And the ham radio operators were the ones that were getting through a lot of the emergency traffic for people. So when the internet goes down and then the cell towers go down, the last thing that's going to be left is going to be the radio waves. And it's good to have people out there that know that your average radio runs on a 12-volt system. You can run it off your car, which can be recharged by driving around. And so it's the greatest fallback that there is. It's the original internet.
Yeah.
You just got to know how to use it.
Right. Yeah. So I do. Yeah. I recommend looking into this. And you said when your class, you can email you. Anybody who wants to contact me, I can put you. Usually, I know the schedule ahead of time. Usually 6 months in advance, I know where the classes are going to be and which type of class that we're giving. They can email me at w9spy@mail.com. So that's Whiskey Niner Sierra Papa Yankee at mail.com. And I usually will get back to you, and I can tell you when the next upcoming class is and give you the dates and the time and the address. Awesome. Well, thanks for talking about that. I think we're going to play some more recordings from the Conet project.
My favorite.
And then Curt may have some things he wants to say about them as we go along.
I'll try to keep it to a minimum.
No, it's great. But so let's go ahead and turn that on.
What are we going to play next? Just random number station sounds?
We can go to, you want to play, there's odd clacking at 4039 kilohertz. Bizarre data noise.
That sounds like a good one.
Let's do bizarre data noise.
All right. And this, just for the benefit of everybody, this is the long sought after disc 5 of the Conet, which was originally a 5 CD set. And this just recently got issued as a 5 CD set. And I'll throw in a little bit of a trivia here. I actually was posted a link. I sent out a tweet off of my Twitter feed, and I sent out a link to what I thought was one of the oddest recordings found on the original Conet Project CD, and none other than Akeem Fernandez himself came back and answered my tweet. He goes, "Have you heard Disc 5?" And I'm, "No, I haven't. Here's my email address." And he ended up actually mailing this 5 CD set to me. That's how I got my hands on it. So yeah, so let's play it. So just as a way of explanation, again, we're listening to Disc 5 of the Conet Project CD set, and I want to just remind everybody that this stuff was recorded just by people monitoring the airwaves and dialing around and randomly finding these signals. And, you know, if they've listened long enough, they can identify some of the more typical and well-known digital signals that are out there. But every now and then you'll come across something like what we've been listening to that nobody has a single clue as what they are. And they will broadcast for hours and hours, and you have to wonder what it is that you're listening to.
So this is the insane one. This is insane.
Yeah. This is the name of the track, Insane?
Yeah.
Yeah.
right, that was another recording from the Conet project. And we were just talking, and we're talking about using this for music and stuff, and you mentioned that you had a friend who...
Yeah, a fellow named Doug DeLoach from my days when I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and he put together an art show called Coalescence. And what this was, back in the days of good old punk rock, and someone rented out a warehouse for the night, and of course all the lights were dimmed down low, and they had, I can't remember if it was 4 or 5 people seated at tables, and everybody had a shortwave radio in front of them with earphones on, and they were dialing around so that nobody could hear until they found a really interesting signal, and they had all 5 of these radios plugged into the sound system that was inside the warehouse for the audience. And so when someone found something really interesting, they'd raise their hand and they'd lower the level on 4 radios and bring up the level on radio 1, and then somebody else would find something, they'd lower the level. And so you had what sounded like a really strange radio signal concert in real time from what people were listening to over shortwave radio. This was back in, I can't remember. I think I've got the description on my YouTube channel.
It says 1991.
91. That sounds about right. Yeah.
So yeah, we're gonna play a little bit of this recording. It says it was recorded in where did you say this was?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta. Yeah. Okay. So this is called Coalescence.
Coalescence.
Okay. All right. That was Coalescence?
Yeah, Coalescence. And again, this is predating something like the Conet project by a few years, and these guys just put on what's essentially a shortwave oddity sound fest.
Yeah.
It was art. That's what we called art.
So we have like 10 minutes left, and Tyson, the next DJ, is here.
Hey, Tyson.
And we were just telling him what we were doing in here for the last 2 hours, and we thought, let's give a demo live on what this is exactly. So we pulled up that
University of Twente Web SDR.
UTWENTE. If you look up SDR, software defined radio. So we're looking at the site. you see this kind of purple background with all these lines scrolling up that represent the frequencies.
And down along the bottom, you'll see numbers and hashes denoting the kilohertz in between different frequencies.
And so there's a little pointer. It looks like an Atari game or something, like a Space Invader.
That's exactly the way to put it.
So you can like move it around. You see the lines going by with a some transmission happening somewhere on some frequency, and you can scroll over to it. So we're gonna tune into one and see.
There's a gnomon that most people probably have heard about this one. It's called UVB76 or the buzzer, and it's at 4625 kilohertz. And it's being transmitted out of somewhere near Moscow, Russia, if I've got this correct.
You say 4526?
4625 kilohertz.
Got that right.
That's all right.
4625. Okay.
And it's usually running 24/7, and you can tune into this. We're giving this one because it's an easy one. Anybody that pulls this web SDR up can punch in 4625 and will immediately hear this at home.
Okay. So I'm going to do that real quick.
Sure.
Let's see. 4625?
Yeah. So wouldn't you know it, we go to try to do a live session with the most well-known 24/7 ubiquitous signal on the planet, and guess what? We can't get it to come
We
in.
heard it earlier. It's just like a buzzer sound.
Yeah, exactly. There's actually a day and a night frequency. I can't remember the day frequency. Of course, I think it's daytime right now in Russia. It's probably like 6 o'clock in the morning their UTC time. So it's possible they switched over to the day frequency or something. But we did have it on earlier, and of course we're doing this live, and guess what?
Of course.
The Russians have messed with us. We can't hear UVB76, so...
But...
Trust me when I tell you, it just goes,
That's it right there.
over and over again.
We can, let's see, maybe...
We have a recording of it somewhere in here, but, yeah.
Let's see.
But anyway, this particular signal is, again, it's 24/7, and most people believe it's just a channel marker. It's on there so it would deter anybody else from using that frequency, because the Russians do use it. Every now and then they'll shut the buzzer off and they'll send out really cryptic messages in the Russian language, usually 1 or 2 words.
So here's just something else. I just scrolled up a little bit. And
Okay.
So we'll see.
Sometimes with experience, and they went away for a little bit less than the locals in the West, and then they just took them and released them. That was expert in Romania.
Southeast Asia and the Pacific area has come.
In der TSV-Galerie am Salzkreis zu sehen.
So that was pretty random.
So, yeah, in Curt's professional opinion, that is a carrier signal of weirdness. That's what we just tuned into randomly.
Yeah.
So you can just scroll around and find...
Yeah, have fun with it. You know, I mean, go out and you can find the known signals. You can look on, there are a lot of groups out there that will publish frequency lists. You can go listen. You'll get the date and time and the frequency to go listen for these signals. But, have some fun with it. Go and find strange ones of your own, because there are plenty of them out there to listen to. You might be the discoverer of something brand new, and you can name it. The beacon of oddness, or whatever you want to do.
Well, thanks so much for coming on air tonight. I Really appreciate it.
Totally my pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. You're listening to KHUH-LP Seattle 104.9 FM Hollow Earth Radio. Tyson is next. Tyson, you want to talk about what you're going to be doing tonight? Or?
The only thing I can tell you is that we'll be starting with Plastic Man, and we'll go from there.
Right. Yeah. Thanks again. We'll just let this go while Tyson sets up, and then thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Have a good night, everyone.
Ciao.
Thank you.